Welcome back to the FPL video and podcast. This will be the updated wildcard team, and I've made several changes to what I talked about last week. I'd still encourage you to check that out because there are some great picks mentioned in there. But today, I'm going in a different path, taking into account all the latest injury updates, what's happened over the international break, and considering some key topics going into Game Week 4. Check out all my other content as well, such as the transfer tips, both the updated version and the original one. The team selection is coming right up. I also discussed my transfer plans a couple of days ago, and there is UCL fantasy videos coming your way. There's already 2 drafts up on the channel. There'll be the team selection and the deadline stream, and even predicted lineups for FPL if you want to see it. Smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. If you enjoy my content, our aim is to get this to the 200 likes as usual. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. One aspect that hasn't changed too much is the goalkeeper pairing. I've gone for Verbruggen as a 4.5 million option. The next 2 fixtures look great for the Seagulls. After that, it gets a bit tough, but that's where the goalkeeper rotation really comes into play, and you can go for another 4.5 million goalkeeper who has good fixtures when Brighton have some tough games like Chelsea and Tottenham on paper, and that's where Flecken comes in, and I think this combination is the best you'll see for the next couple of months, and for only a combined total of 9 million in terms of budget. You could always downgrade one of these options to a 4 million goalkeeper like Fabianski, who could still start in Game Week 4, but Areola is making some big improvements. He'll probably be in contention to start in Game Week 4, so I wouldn't really count on a 4 million goalkeeper starting for your FPL team, and I think Verbruggen and Flecken is the only goalkeeper duo I'd recommend for rotation. I know we're stacked in this position in terms of 4.5 million defenders, but I still struggle to pick out one that really stands out over the others. I think Robinson would be that player, but he has gone up to 4.6 million. I've recommended him in all of my videos and podcasts, despite the fact that Fulham have kept no clean sheets so far. But Mazraoui has been a decent signing for Manchester United so far. He's been playing quite well, not just from an FPL perspective, but also his overall performances. Despite their 3-0 defeat to Liverpool just before the international break, I think Mazraoui was the best of a relatively bad bunch, to put it very kindly. I think he's going to be a good 4.5 million defender, and there's a good chance of a clean sheet against Southampton away in the first game of Game Week 4. So Mazraoui would be one of my recommendations if you wanted to go for any United defender. He's not someone you want to start week in, week out though, and that's where you've got the squad depth and the rotation to make this pick possible. Next up is going to be a bit of a contentious one because I'm not a huge fan of defensive double-ups, and to go for a Brighton one does seem a bit weird, but Lewis Dunk is a very good centre-back to have for the next 2 game weeks. He has goal potential, 16 goals throughout his Premier League career. He can get the odd bonus point, and Brighton have been very impressive in the Premier League so far. They are unbeaten up until this point, and I think they'll keep that until Game Week 6 at the very least. So Lewis Dunk is a top recommendation from me, but if you don't want to go for Verbruggen and Dunk at the same time, I completely understand that, and you can go for a different 4.5 million defender like Pau Torres or Concert if you wish, but I will be talking about some of these options in future videos and podcasts, and I did cover them in the original best wildcard team. Next up will be a Liverpool defender. I think they have the best fixtures over the next 4 or 5 game weeks, especially compared to Manchester City and Arsenal, and that's where Andrew Robertson can really be one of the best 6 million defenders over this time period. He has attacking potential, although he hasn't shown it too much in the last year or so, and if you have the money, Trent is definitely worth the extra million. At this point of the season, there's only a 2-point difference between the two, but I think over the course of the campaign, Trent will pull ahead with the bonus points and more assists, and he also is on set pieces. He is such a great player to own, and Trent has been very unlucky not to deliver one attack and return so far. He has created big chances for the likes of Diogo Jota in the first 2 game weeks, and he had a goal disallowed in Game Week 3, rightfully so, but I think the goal or assist is coming for Trent Alexander-Arnold. Next up is Robinson, with no clean sheets to his name at this point, but I think Fulham can keep 1 clean sheet over the next 3 or 4 game weeks, and he will provide plenty of assists throughout the season, and at 4.6 million or below, I can't see any defender really rivaling Robinson in terms of assists and creativity, so he is still a top recommendation from me. I know some of you still have Joachim Andersen, and that's an awkward situation because there's no guarantee he will start in Game Week 4. If you've got the funds, I would move from Andersen to Robinson, and the same goes for the likes of Mikalenko and other defenders around that price bracket that are really struggling at this moment in time, like Quansah from Liverpool. But the 5th and final defender is a 4 million option who I also discussed and highlighted in the original wildcard team, and that is Greaves. I think he's the best of a relatively bad bunch, I'd say. You have plenty of 4 million starting defenders like Mosquera, but I think Greaves has good fixtures, a decent chance of a clean sheet over the next 5 game weeks. I think 1 is definitely possible, but you can't rely on Ipswich Town to keep those clean sheets and to produce defensive returns. But I think Greaves can get the odd goal here and there. He is definitely very viable in terms of aerial situations. He's very threatening in those scenarios. And I really like this defensive 5. I know in a couple of weeks' time, it will look a lot different. So from game week 6 onwards, you want to have one Arsenal defender. And I still think they'll keep the most clean sheets this season. But I wouldn't recommend the Gunners for the next 2 games against Tottenham and Manchester City. Towards the end of the last wildcard podcast I talked about, I discussed alternatives like Semenyo. I really liked the look of him in the first 3 game weeks, producing attacking returns in every single one of those matches. And Semenyo's always been one of the standout budget midfielders, and he was playing down the middle in game week 1, but with the signing of Evanilson, he's now shifted back to the right-hand side, and he's still producing these goals and assists on a very consistent basis. He is the best budget midfielder currently. That might change in a couple of weeks' time. You've still got Smith Rowe and Rodgers, even Amadou Onana, who looks like a really enticing option, but I think Semenyo is the best of the lot for the next couple of game weeks. I know the next 2 fixtures look quite tough on paper against Chelsea at home and Liverpool away, but Semenyo scored at Anfield last season, and in fact, after that, you've got some pretty good fixtures for Bournemouth, so Semenyo is the best Cherries asset and one of the best midfielders at his price point, so I'd highly recommend him if you don't have him already. He was also a buy in the Transits video and podcast I discussed very recently. But next up, I'm going for some expensive players to say the least. I'm going for a midfield double up in Liverpool, and Mohamed Salah seems essential at the moment, but I don't think any player is necessarily an absolute must-have or you'll do terribly. So some of you might not have Salah, but are still really high up in the ranks because of Erling Haaland or other premium assets like Cole Palmer. So you don't have to go for Salah necessarily, but for the next 2 game weeks, I'd argue he's the best FPL asset in the game, even over the Norwegian robot up front. 2 home games against Nottingham Forest and Bournemouth. He's a great captaincy choice in both game weeks, and I think Salah is a very good option on the wild card and one of the best you can go for in game week 4. Now, the next midfielder is going to be Diogo Jota, who played 90 minutes for Portugal in the 2-1 win over Scotland, and just before that he was on the bench, but he came on in the 88th minute for Cristiano Ronaldo in another 2-1 victory over Croatia. Now, Luis Diaz will play against Argentina tonight, and let's see how he fares on. He also scored against Peru. He's in fine form for club and country, and arguably in much better form than Diogo Jota. But I'm looking at Game Week 4 specifically, and I think Jota has a great record against Forest, as I discussed in the recent podcast. He's got 6 goals in 5 appearances against that opposition, and 3 in 2 in the Premier League alone. So I think Jota will outscore Diaz in Game Week 4. Beyond that, it's a tougher call, and based on form, I think Diaz does win it. You can still go for the Colombian if you wish. They're priced at the exact same, and for Liverpool recently, it's Diaz getting the double-digit hauls, whilst Jota has been quite frustrating. He's missed several big chances in the first couple of game weeks, and it easily could have been 10 plus points in game week 1 against Ipswich Town. He missed an open goal essentially, and that was created by Trent Alexander-Arnold. But there are 2 midfielder slots left. I'm going for a budget midfielder here in Morgan Rodgers. I'm not a huge fan of having 2 5.6 million and below midfielders, but it can still work very nicely. They offer great value, and Morgan Rodgers scored for England. In fact, he scored a penalty, and that does spark a debate about can he take penalties for Aston Villa. I think he'll be second or third in command, with Tielemans being the first choice, but if the Belgian isn't on the pitch, maybe Morgan Rodgers could take the penalties for Aston Villa. I don't trust Ollie Watkins from the spot. He's got a bad record there, but overall, it's something to consider. If he does have penalties as well at 5.1 million with those upcoming fixtures, I think Morgan Rodgers can pull ahead of the likes of Emil Smith-Rowe, Onana and Semenyo. But I know some of you might be thinking, Onana's getting the goals right now. Why go for Rodgers over Onana? I think in the long term, Rodgers' underlying numbers and the attacking positions he occupies will end up outscoring Onana, who is mainly targeted from set pieces. But beyond that, you can't trust Onana to score on a consistent basis. I think this purple patch will end. Onana's a great signing for Aston Villa, but in terms of FPL points, I think they'll die down very soon. And to finalise this midfield, I would recommend a 7 million midfielder or someone around that price. It just offers a bit more flexibility and an ideal team structure, if you can really put it that way. But I'm going to go for Eze. I think that Leicester at home fixture in Game Week 4 is fantastic. And even afterwards, you've got the likes of Everton, and I could see Eze doing really well in these sort of games. The only one I'd be quite not really enticed by would be Liverpool away for Crystal Palace, but I think Eze can deliver in most matches this season. He has great underlying numbers, particularly in terms of shot volume, with 15 for the season and a few key passes. He's getting big chances, but just everything goes through him in that Crystal Palace team, and the signing of Eddie Nketiah can be very beneficial for the Eagles. I can see Eze combining very well with him and Jean-Philippe Mateta, so that front three can work very well. Not to the same extent as Analyse last season. I think that's a huge miss for Crystal Palace, but Eddie Nketiah is a very smart signing, and he'll score plenty of goals for Crystal Palace. Now, Bryan Mbeumo is still one of my favourite midfielders, and from Game Week 6 onwards, I definitely recommend one or two Brentford players. They've got great long-term fixtures, and Mbeumo can do it against absolutely anybody, even Man City at the Etihad, but he is benchable on paper in Game Week 4, and if I had to pick between him or Eze on a Game Week 4 wildcard, I'm going to go for the Crystal Palace Tasman in Eze. Danny Welbeck is the second highest scoring forward in FPL so far this season, but there's an 18-point difference between him and the top dog in Erling Haaland. But then again, there's a 9.5 million difference in their price tags. Danny Welbeck costs 5.7 million. He offers tremendous value, and you can go for either him or Joao Pedro. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other, but for Game Week 4, Danny Welbeck would be a bit more secure for this specific game week. Now, you can still go for Joao Pedro, as I discussed in the original Wildcard podcast, so it's up to you if you want to go for one over the other. Just bear in mind that if Joao Pedro plays for Brazil against Paraguay tonight, that could probably lead to a decrease in his minutes for Game Week 4, and don't be surprised if he is benched. But a lot of Brighton's assets like Minter and Mitoma are doing some very big travel distances, just like Joao Pedro. The only one who isn't is Danny Welbeck, and that's what leads me to believe he'll play the full 90 or close to it in Game Week 4. But in FPL, you can't just think about the upcoming game week. You have to strike a balance between the short term and also the long term. And in this case, with the wild card, you really want to think about the future and not just about what's right in front of you. In terms of Danny Welbeck versus Joao Pedro, there's not much to separate them. Welbeck has the better underlying stats so far, but Joao Pedro is arguably better for bonus points. And in terms of minutes played, I think they're both going to be identical. In certain matches, Joao Pedro will get 90 minutes and Welbeck will be subbed off around 70 or 80. I would argue longer term though, Danny Welbeck would be more at risk of losing his spot in the starting 11 because Joao Pedro is more versatile. He can play up front, on the wings, and also as a second striker or attacking midfielder, and I think that's what would lead me towards Joao Pedro in certain cases, but honestly, you can take your pick. Either is completely fine, and I did cover both across both of these wildcard videos and podcasts. But next up is a top dog, Erling Haaland. He is the best asset in the game alongside Mohamed Salah. There's not much to separate them. In fact, they've got the same number of FPL points and bonus. But I think over the next two games specifically, I think Salah will pull ahead based on the fixtures. But don't be surprised if Haaland scores against the likes of Arsenal, Newcastle, and then further down the road, the likes of Liverpool, who could be another title contender. Haaland is still worth the price at 15.2 million. Going for both will lead to a sort of imbalance, and you can go for a stronger team by maybe downgrading one of Haaland or Salah. You can then buy the likes of Saka and Palmer in the midfield, or Trent Alexander-Arnold in the defensive line, but it's still possible to have a very competitive 15-man squad that has some balance in certain cases, and it will be sustainable in the long term. Just be careful about the way you structure your team because you don't want to completely rely on one or two players. I've been doing quite well so far this season, but I do feel like I'm relying a lot on Erling Haaland, and I want to kind of put my eggs in more baskets and not just rely on one individual. But the third and final forward is Isak. I know he hasn't been that great so far this season, but he does have a goal and an assist. He got maximum bonus points against Tottenham Hotspur, and Wolves away is a great fixture for him. He has 2 goals in 2 appearances against that opposition, and I could see him doing well against Fulham. Then it's Man City in Game Week 6, but by that stage, you could maybe sell him to a Kai Havertz, and I did cover the German in the original Best Wildcard Team. He also scored for his country during the international break. But with Martin Odegaard potentially injured and Arsenal missing their entire first-choice midfield three in the North London derby, I could see Kai Havertz being shifted to the midfield, where he can still get the odd goal contribution, but it's not something you really want to see. Kai Havertz is far more effective playing down the middle, and only the likes of Palmer and Haaland have outscored him in this calendar year. So Kai Havertz is still a viable option. You'd want some Arsenal players in place for Game Week 6. And remember, when you play the wildcard now in this new season, you can still have your transfers from before, so they don't reset to 0 as they used to do, or to 1, should I say. And I really like this 50-man squad. If you've got 2 or 3 free transfers to use, that could really work well as you get to Game Week 6. It gives you a lot of flexibility, and you could essentially play another mini wildcard by that stage. And in Game Week 6, you want to go for more Brentford assets like Wissa and Mbeumo, and then Arsenal players like Raya in goal, but I wouldn't recommend goalkeeper transfers, to be fair. I think Raya's the best way of covering the Gunners defensively, but if you don't go for him now on the wild card, then just go for the likes of Verbruggen or Flecken as a cheaper option. You've got Saliba, Gabriel and White in the defensive line, then Sak in the midfield and Kai Havertz up front. So you'd want to go for 2 Arsenal players by Game Week 6 and probably 2 or 3 Brentford as well. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, but I'll show you the lineup now using FPL.team, and perhaps at the very end I'll also show you what Drafthound are saying in terms of the best transfers and fixtures. You will have some selection headaches with this squad, especially further down the road, but in terms of the goalkeepers, it's very clear to play Verbruggen at home to Ipswich Town over Flecken away to Man City. Now, the Dutchman can get plenty of points, and by the Dutchman, I'm referring to Flecken. He did very well against Man City last season, producing multiple saves and getting some very healthy FPL returns as a result, accumulating a few bonus points in the process. But in terms of clean sheet probabilities, you're going to go for Verbruggen in goal for Brighton, then Mazraoui, Dunk and Robertson as part of the back three, with Rodgers, Jota, Salah and Eze, Welbeck, Haaland and Isak up front. Remember, you can go for Joao Pedro over Welbeck. I wouldn't be too doom and gloom about Joao Pedro's prospects in Game Week 4. Just bear in mind that there could be an impact based on the late call-up to Brazil, and the bench would comprise of Flecken, Semenyo, Robinson and Greaves in that order. You could even go for Semenyo over Rodgers. I wouldn't be against that, and in fact, I originally had that set up with the Bournemouth winger in the starting 11, and FPL.team do recommend it. There's only a difference of 0.1 expected points, so we're talking about very fine margins here, and that reflects the difficulty of that particular selection headache. That's the only one you'd really have with this 50-man squad. So like I said, you can go for Joao Pedro over Welbeck, but also Diaz instead of Jota. There are some big 50-50 calls for you to make. And the only downside I'd see is having no Arsenal coverage whatsoever and a double up in Brighton defensively, which looks great for the next 2 game weeks, but not so much in the long term. So be very careful about these particular aspects, and check out my original Best Wildcard Team video and podcast for all the coverage heading into Game Week 4, and you will not be disappointed whatsoever. In terms of the captaincy, it's very close. I would lean towards Salah, but as I get closer to the Game Week 4 deadline, I am leaning more towards Erling Haaland, and it wouldn't surprise me if I end up kind of switching in that debate. But at the moment, I'm going for Salah. The midfield advantage is definitely clear. I think Forest and Brentford are quite similar opponents. I would probably argue Forest is a slightly better fixture on paper, but their underlying defensive numbers are quite decent, so it's not an absolute guarantee that Salah and Haaland will return, but based on their form this season, it's very likely that both of them could produce another big haul once again, possibly even double digits for both of them. So if you do prefer Haaland, let me know down in the comment section below. Is there anything you change with this best wildcard team? Try to go for Arsenal players eventually if you can, but more so in Game Week 6 with all the injury problems they have in the North London derby. They're possibly in a void for Game Week 4, and going into the next week against Man City away, it doesn't look great for the Gunners. Using the website Drafthound, and there is a link in the description below, they're really recommending Man City, Liverpool and Brighton midfielders or attackers in Game Week 4, as they have the best chance of scoring more than 2 goals in the upcoming set of fixtures. And if we toggle this by chance of keeping a clean sheet in Game Week 4, Liverpool go top, Man City are second, but Brighton remain in third, Aston Villa fourth, and there are some changes further down the table with Arsenal pushing even further up. They've got the best defence in the league, arguably, but it's a very tough game on paper against Tottenham away. There are so many different tools at your disposal. My personal favourite is the player rankings, and you can also toggle it by so many different metrics like chance of scoring, even of getting a yellow card. So be sure to check out Drafthound. I'll probably refer to it in my team selection podcast too. Ultimately, make your own decisions and use tools like Drafthound to aid your decision making, but don't rely on it completely. I don't think that's the best course of action. The same goes for copying teams or kind of relying on others to make the best decisions possible for your FPL squads. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe for new. Our aim is to get this to the 200 likes and to keep on pushing towards 35 subscribers and beyond. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, for the latest FPL and news fantasy updates. Check the Discord server and be sure to join it. The same goes for the FPL League. Check out Drafthound, which is a great resource I've been using for over a year now. And also check out my Spotify. Leave a 5-star review on your tablets and mobile phones. It goes a long way to supporting my channel. I wish you all the best of luck for Game Week 4 and the rest of the season, and I'll see you next time.